Hey guys, okay, so up until now we've been learning about the Columbo tactic that allows us to gather information of the other person's views and also to discover reasons for their views. The third use of Columbo takes you more on the offensive, where you move towards making statements um, and belief claims. But let me just read a quote from the book. Ultimately, we want to win someone over to our point of view, but we don't want to force our opinions. Instead, we want to persuade. When the steps to a conclusion are both clear and reasonable, it's much easier to convince someone because he can see the route clearly. Okay, and so that's why we are wanting to step on these stepping stones with them in a clear and reasonable manner. You can see why hostility fails because it doesn't allow you that stepping stone path. And then it's just difficult to convince. So he can even retrace it on his own if he wants to. So if you're clear enough and simple enough in your statements, the person should be able to think about it afterwards by themselves. So with each question, you are leading them closer towards the destination. In this way, we bring them along on the journey. When you get approvals for each successive link in the process of reasoning, you move the conversation in the direction you have in mind, and in that way, you carefully guide the other person to your conclusion. So basically, the third use of Columbo is we are using questions to inform. So that's what I mean by moving closer to making statements. You're actually still using questions. It was incorrect to say you're making statements. You're actually still using questions, but your questions are more on the offensive in that they are now going to inform, they're going to be used to persuade, they're going to be used to refute, and to set up the conversation in such a manner that you can lead them on this journey to the point that you are trying to get them to. So, for example, Koukl was talking to a Jewish guy, and the guy was a lawyer. So, knowing that he was a lawyer, he asked him, do you believe that a moral crime requires punishment? He said yes. Then he asked him, notice the questions are leading somewhere. Then he asked him, so have you ever committed a moral crime? And the guy obviously said yes. And then Koukl said, yeah, me too, and this puts us in a predicament. And now they had come to the point that Koukl wanted them to come to in the journey. And then Koukl could actually say the following, and I want to read another quote. I love this. Koukl then said to him, this is where Jesus comes in. And he said, we both know we're guilty, and that's the problem. So God offers a solution, a pardon, free of charge. But clemency is on his terms, not ours. Jesus is God's means of pardon, and he personally paid the penalty in our place. He took the rap for our crimes, and no one else did that. Only Jesus. Now we have a choice to make. Either we take the pardon and go free, or we turn it down and pay for our own crimes. Guys, this is our position as provisionists. I don't know how Koukl can say he's a Calvinist when he says things like this. Anyway, let's not get into that discussion. But this is just beautiful. I love the way that he said this and how he got the person to that point. And I am seeing, Koukl does make the point, he says it again in this chapter, we don't hit a home run every time. It is difficult. But you're on the steps of the journey, and we're going to pick up on this a bit later in this conversation. So, in talking about the third use of Columbo's tactics, the Columbo tactics, we've noted that you can use a leading question, right? We've had an example of that. Um, the next point is tell them something that they know already. So Koukl uses the example of a girl on the airplane who he met. She was a Christian and she was confused as to why people who believe in God are not saved. And she's talking about people who aren't born again, who haven't accepted Christ. But she's saying, they're sincere in their belief and they believe in God. So, why are they being cut off? And what Koukl did, he told her something she knows. He used this particular aspect of the third use of Columbo tactics. He just took her on a little path of what she already knows. He said, okay, so you and I are born again believers, right? And what does that benefit us? Questions, notes, what do we get out of that? And as she explained, we get salvation, we're rescued, we're cleansed from our sin, and then he was like, yes, because we have the sin disease. Does being a morally good person clean us of that disease? Does belief in God clean us of that disease? Only faith in Christ can clean us of that disease. Okay, and then the penny dropped for her, and it made sense to her why it is that not anybody who just declares belief in God has a pathway open to them to enter heaven, because Jesus is the only way, because he's the only one who has paid the price for our sin and who deals with our sin disease. Okay, so this third use of Columbo tactics can also get you out of a tough situation. So, for example, a friend of his who worked for a lesbian boss knew that the lesbian wants to know from her, what's your opinion on homosexuality? You work for me, I want to know what your view is. And so he said, she's in a bit of a tough situation here. She has to answer and she has to give her opinion. And so his advice in that situation is he calls it the passive aggressive tolerance trick. So essentially you would say to your boss something like, okay, well, you've asked me a very personal question, and before I answer, I would just like to know if it's safe for me to share my personal view. How do you feel about people who may differ from you? And then he started to list questions that you can ask somebody to really help them to realize that their intolerance of you. So when you've done giving your opinion, if they were to then attack you on that or judge you, then it's just going to be so obvious that they're actually being intolerant. So that's his passive aggressive tolerance trick, where you just stop and pause the conversation and create room to speak, but first clarify and really highlight and verbalize and bring out in the open what he says is just a fact. Everybody has an opinion that they believe is right, otherwise they wouldn't believe it. So you're going with that, and you're saying, are you intolerant when somebody doesn't agree with the opinion that you've chosen to hold? When someone disagrees with you, how do you respond to them? Are you intolerant? And so I'm just trying to find out if the space for me to speak is safe. And then by the time you give your opinion, you should have less, should we just call it what the kids today call it, hate speech, or you'll have less judgment coming at you. Okay, and then this third use of Columbo tactics it has the benefit of allowing you to exploit the flaw, the error in the person's statement. So now you've spent time with your first two questions understanding what they believe and why they believe it. So you should understand the weakness in those views by this time. And if you don't, just keep asking questions until you do understand. But this is now your opportunity at this point to start revealing those flaws. But again, don't do it with statements, okay? He makes it very clear, very clear. Don't make statements. Use questions to reveal the flaw. Because statements are just going to take it south. You want to focus on letting the other person speak and letting them hear their views and letting them verbalize. So even with that Jewish guy, he verbalized that he's a sinner. He verbalized that his sin needed punishment. Koukl didn't tell it to him. He asked him questions so that in the answers that guy recognized and realized and acknowledged. So make sure you're using questions to make a statement, to bring out the flaw or the weakness in the argument that you're trying to highlight for them. At this point, I just want to add a personal perspective is I really see the need for wisdom from the Lord in this process and at this stage. You really need the Lord's wisdom. I mean, if I'm sitting in front of a lesbian boss, I really want the Lord's wisdom in how to answer and how to respond. And, we need the Lord's prompting. So we need to be sure that we are walking with Him, because the enemy will take a gap. If we are not close to the Lord, or if there's sin in our lives, if there's something in the way, we're going to come short. And so in all of this, it's so important to be close to the Lord and to be hearing His voice and to actually be Spirit-led. He has promised to help us, and we want to be able to hear His voice. Proverbs 20 verse 5, I'm just going to add this in to the chapter and the conversation. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but the one who has insight draws them out. And I think that insight is really impacted also by the Holy Spirit. So let's get back to the book. In this process, we're looking for the walls that will hold up the roof that the person has put down. And we want to use our questions to, first of all, we used our questions to help them see, to help us understand what their walls are and why they believe those are strong walls. And now, we're in the third use of Columbo's tactics, we're helping them to see that these walls can't really stand as they think that they are standing. And it's our job to show them why the walls can't stand. Okay. If you feel stumped or stalled out or flushed out, and you are struggling, then this question process can actually also help you to deal with that. Our questions, we can just go back to saying, have I understood you correctly? And run it by them again, and then just say, I think I'd like to actually think about that. Or he also says in this chapter, that was in one of the earlier chapters where he advised that. In this chapter, he also says, don't feel bad if you're not nailing it, you're not at recognizing what the right questions are to ask. Let the conversation run to an end and move on. And he says, don't be discouraged, because every single conversation isn't going to go the way we planned. All right, but it doesn't mean that we haven't advanced the kingdom, because if we've had any impact at all in helping them in a step in the right direction, even a small step, then we have helped to further the kingdom. And then Koukl reiterates that we should be innocent as doves. Matthew 10:16. He thinks that verse could also possibly mean that we should be clever in our approach and innocent in our appearance. So he's given some ways of how to soften the challenge. So if you're coming with your third use of Columbo and you are being a little bit more direct, you can soften that by using phrases like, have you considered this? Or can you just clear this up for me? Or, there are things you can say, things like, let me suggest an alternative, or I would characterize it like this, or I don't think that's going to work. Let me suggest an alternative. So the way that we speak emphasizes respect. And I like that very much about Koukl's approach, is it is very respectful. And isn't that what it's about, to love other people, how we speak to them, how we treat them? This is undergirded in an attitude of love. And I like that about this soft, respectful manner of this approach. I find that to be very biblical. Then he makes the point also that if the person, because often these people haven't really thought through what they are saying that they believe, and they may start side skirting or trying to change the topic. Now, if it's a public debate or on the radio, as has happened to him, then what you can do, or if others are listening, if it's a debate, maybe even if it is in person, you can just say, look, let me just recap. I'd like you to notice what just happened. I'm going to read you the quote, okay? I want you to notice what has just happened. First, you made a fairly controversial statement, and I asked you a couple of questions about it. So far, you haven't answered them, and instead, you've taken off in another direction. But before we move on to a new topic, would it be okay with you if we finish the old one? I'm really interested in your response. You can see how he maintains respect and dignity and pulls the person back and holds them accountable, keeps the burden of proof on them. But then I also think you don't have to do that in a private setting. If the person doesn't want to communicate anymore, um, then you could maybe say something along these lines and then say, but we can talk about it another day. It's okay. Or you'll know, and you'll decide at the time how to keep it cordial and which direction you want to take it in. So that's a basic, quick summary of chapter 5 of Greg Koukl's Tactics. I just want to add in a few verses to just reiterate that asking leading questions is quite biblical. Um, so when Jesus asked the disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? But who do you say I am? All right. He was leading them and putting them in a position where they could recognize his identity and the truth of his identity. And God, I love the way God uses questions in the Bible. Like when he said to Cain, why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, you'll be accepted. And God often uses questions to help us admit something. He asked Adam and Eve, did somebody tell you that you're naked? you know so questions make us answer out of the heart. We hear it in our own minds. And this week I was listening to a discussion by a Christian who used to be very much into yoga things until she got saved, and she then wrote a paper on yoga, and she made the point that when family members were trying to witness to her before she turned back to the Lord, there was one couple who would talk to her very gently and sweetly always, and they were very non-confrontational. But she says that even when she answered them, she would know her words aren't right, and she would go away and think about that. So the couple didn't know that she had acknowledged in her mind, but she would go away and she'd think about what she'd acknowledged in her mind. So, and she eventually did turn to the Lord. Um, so when we ask people questions, we might not know the response going on in the heart, but it's a biblical thing that we answer out of the heart. We know what that answer is in our minds. We may not verbalize it to the person. I don't know what Cain was thinking when the Lord asked him, um, but we admit when we hear the answer, our own answer. And this is why we can't tell people what to believe and what to do, because, and like I'm thinking of in parenting, we need to lead our children to realizing for themselves so that it's their own faith and their own walk. We can't be telling and instructing, you know. When Jesus asked the rich young ruler, why do you call me good? Jesus was highlighting for him something about his identity. God is not good, he is holy. It's not good, it's holy. There's that one song, um, you're a good, good father. I don't like it because God is holy. He's not good, he's holy. And that's so much more than good. And, let me just move on to in Acts, when Paul reasoned with the people and explained and proved scripture, so putting forth a good argument is a very good and biblical thing to do. And I'm super chuffed that we can learn from someone as amazing and experienced as Greg Koukl.